What is up, guys? Pie Muffin here, and we are back with another Trails-related video. So, I know it's been a bit since I actually uploaded a video of any kind, honestly. Obviously, they have continued doing more Sky the First promotion, but at this point, as someone who, obviously has played the game already, I don't really want to just make a video every single time they reveal a new character trailer and stuff, since we already know what to expect. And I also don't want to just look at everything and, spoil myself on everything we're going to see in this remake. So I really haven't covered it. Obviously, at this point, we have seen all the character trailers. It was actually just yesterday, about a day ago, when they dropped the last two. They dropped them together, the Tita and Zin ones, which, since they're double dropping them instead of just doing them 2 weeks apart, what I do think is within the next few weeks, they're probably going to release the opening for Sky First. I'll definitely do a video on that when they drop that. We'll go over to see, I am curious to see if they're just going to do a new rendition of the original opening, try to copy it one for one, but instead just with the 3D animations that they do now, in-game. Or if they're just going to do something completely new. I do expect it'll be the same song as the original, probably just a new rendition of it. But I've pretty much done all the coverage for Sky. Unless something crazy comes out, like some important stuff that needs to be talked about. I don't think I'm going to make many more Sky First videos until I actually start my playthrough here in about a month and a half when the game releases. This, on the other hand, is something I wanted to make a video on. It is a interview with Kondo, talking about Kaino Kiseki, Trails Beyond the Horizon for the English version, the ending, what the implications of the ending are, and what we can expect moving forward, as well as just talking about the different systems of the game as well. I've already read through it myself, but I wanted to make a video to, kind of talk about it in depth more. As obvious it is to say, if you have not played the game, I would click off this video. Obviously, I made sure to be somewhere in the article where it's not going to spoil anything yet, but this is your spoiler warning. You are going to see the end visual, for the game, which will spoil pretty much the entirety of what happens in the game. So, if you have not played either just the Japanese version, or if you found the fan translation somehow and played it, other than those people, I would not look at this because you're going to get some major spoilers on this game. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get into it. I'm not going to read every single word because this is also just Google translated, so we can get through it faster. And just kind of talk about the key points. So let's go ahead and get started. It's been about 10 months now since Trails Beyond the Horizon Japanese release, and of course now we know we are about 5 months. We actually do... Oh, this is another thing I can talk about that I didn't make a video on. We do have an official release date now for the English version after the delay of Trails Beyond the Horizon. It's going to be January 15th, so obviously I'll do a full playthrough of that when it comes out. The only issue I can really say, if you follow this channel and you are not caught up, you didn't play the Japanese release or whatever, if this December they do start talking about the sequel to Trails Beyond the Horizon and what stuff is going to be in there, I'm obviously going to make videos on it, but at the very least, I will try to keep spoilery stuff out of the thumbnails. So that way people who are still waiting won't just get spoiled by my thumbnails, because I know how much I get pissed off when I see stuff like that. So I'll just make sure to use a generic picture of Van in the promotional material. Maybe you get spoiled about a new outfit he has or something like that. But other than that, it's not going to be anything crazy. So, let's go ahead. And once again, Google translated, so this stuff isn't going to be perfect. So, obviously, Falcon released Trails Beyond the Horizon, or Kaino Kiseki, which directly translates, when you Google translate, it translates to trajectory of the world. It came out September 26, 2024, which is when I played it originally. The interview, so this interview was held in mid-June. Oh, okay. So they're saying that they were doing an interview for Sky First, that was supposed to be held in mid-June, but it's late because some issue with the editorial department. And then they're also going to have an interview about Sky the First, which the game is releasing September 19th, and they'll have that interview up in the near future. So let's go ahead and go over things. So we're just going to, it's a lot of Q&A stuff, so we're just going to kind of skim through the important parts of it. So it's been a while since it's released, but what is the reaction from your fans? Also, please tell us about the parts you felt were rewarding. The great mystery of the continent of Zemuria, which had been a mystery for a long time, has finally been revealed. Once again, we're going into spoilers, so I'm not going to be holding back from stuff that happens in the game. I'm going to be talking about everything as it pertains to each question. And I feel the fans can now feel the story has finally moved. However, we've received many comments saying it's not over, so in response to that, we thought about the next work as soon as possible, but there were various circumstances, such as Trails of Sky the First coming in between. It's a situation like that. So, obviously, he's talking about how in Trails Beyond the Horizon, we finally find out what is beyond the stars, and we see that it is a fake sky. You know, when you get a scene in Act 2 where Reen and Crow are looking through the telescope in Basil, and because of their unique circumstances of what happened during the Twilight, where they essentially died and were able to reverse that, death, they are able to see the truth of what is in the sky. So there are certain individuals who have had situations like that can see the true sky. Obviously, the ones that were with them, Fee, Toa, Altina, they are not able to see this because nothing in that sense happened to them. If Milliam had been in this game, she probably would have seen the fake sky as well. And so we know that, of course, as well, Lagern's chest, I'm not sure how you're actually supposed to pronounce it, but essentially the Septarian of Time has the world of Zemuria on this 1200 year reset cycle where, once humanity gets too close to reaching the sky and what's beyond it, they start what's called a grand reset to reset things back to after the great collapse 1200 years ago. Or it happens after 12, because obviously we're in 1209, and obviously the reset has now happened 20,000 times. So every time it goes back, and then, humanity resets and goes up until a certain point that the cube deems necessary, and then it gets reset again. So that's obviously what we've learned, and obviously they're saying that because they were doing Trails in the Sky the First, remake, that is why we didn't get the sequel to Trails Beyond the Horizon this September. We'll obviously get a year break, which at first I was kind of miffed about, because I really just wanted to see the conclusion, but them taking an extra year means the game will be just that much better, and they can include a lot more things into it. It's going to be a lot of talking, so I may stop for a few seconds in between. Because that was only the first question. As you said during Trajectory of Flash, which is Trails of Cold Steel, I'm really thinking about finishing it with the third work as much as possible. So obviously that was Kondo before saying he wanted to try and end the Calvert arc in 3 games, when they started. That's right, I wanted to complete the Republic arc in about 2 or 3 games. But when I actually started it, I realized it was a new setting, so I decided to write about the Republic of Calvert in order to depict what kind of place it would be. I used the entire first work of Trajectory of Ray, which is Trails Through Daybreak. From there, I started to tell the story of the entire continent of Zemuria, so I have some regrets about the fact that it's grown a little longer. So because more than any other, most of the arcs this far have been pretty self-contained with their stories, not really about the world, but about each individual, country, so to speak. Obviously the biggest arc so far until we get Horizon 2 was obviously the Erebonia arc. But the Erebonia arc itself was not about the world as a whole. It was about what's happened in Erebonia and Erebonia's history. It didn't really branch out to everything else where, from Daybreak through the end of Kai, we've been learning bits and pieces about some of the greater things within the world itself. So, and obviously this is kind of leading into the finale that he talks about, is that, now that we know what's beyond the stars, where do we go from here? I think the titles often change for each stage, except for Zero and Ao, or Azure in English, where Crossbell is set. The Liberal Kingdom equals Sky, Ereboni Empire equals Cold Steel, etc. This time we have changed from Ray to the world, so Daybreak to Horizon. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice already. We just got started. Is there any intention in this area? He says, there's no such big reason, but I wanted to convey to users through the title that the series is heading towards the climax. I felt that Trajectory of the Dawn, Trails Through Daybreak, was contained in the story of the Republic, and although I will continue to depict it, I will continue to depict it from there. While it is the story of the Republic, I will continue to draw it from Trajectory of the Sky. It's obviously weird translations. It's obviously meant to be Trajectory of the World. That this is the end of the story of the continent of Zemuria, where I wanted the staff to be aware of this. So, like he said, moving forward from here, it's going to be about the greater scope of what's beyond Zemuria instead of just being confined to this continent. Now, obviously, things are still going to happen in this continent, but I do feel like probably after this arc is concluded, the cast is going to be thinking about, okay, what is beyond our world? Why was Zemuria created? All that kind of stuff. After all, I've been making it for a long time, so I tried to do as usual, but instead, since it's already the climax, I decided to change the title to include the message that I'm even more motivated. Up until now, it's called, they're basically just saying it was Daybreak, which is inspired by Van, but it becomes a story about the entire world. So the title shows how the story has become even more grand, using the world and boundaries. There are some things I want to express. Trail series is often 1 in 2 works, but this time it feels like it's expanded from Daybreak. But when the first work comes out, and considering the way it was released in the past, there is a gap between them. It also includes Trails in the Sky the First. How long did it take to develop Kai no Kiseki? So the shape, the amount was almost parallel to the production of Rei no Kiseki 2. Although, okay, so it's saying Rei no Kiseki 2, which is Daybreak 2. Although most of the staff may have something in common, the core members, including those who decide on the scenario, are involved in Kai no Kiseki in advance. And by the end of Daybreak 2, I was hoping that the scenario for Kai no Kiseki had already been decided. As for how to make it, the 2 works of Rei no Kiseki, Trails Through Daybreak, were made into one set as usual. And the platform expression and 3D model were also changed from there. From this trend, Kai no Sky the First was introduced. But since the series continues, the battle system had been inherited, but some time has passed, and the content has been upgraded to create a third work. It became a form. So I'm just saying that, Sky the First is obviously inheriting the combat system and just models and stuff. Obviously, Sky First is a lot more expressive than the previous works before it, but it is still in the same similar system of what we're currently using in the mainline games. The 3 route branches were decided upon during development. The scale was also large, like Trajectory of Creation, which is Trails into Reverie. Multiple routes were drawn in parallel. Of course, Van is the main character, but was it intended to depict the story from multiple angles like this? If anything, this happened in some ways during the production process. After all, if you draw the story from Van's own perspective, the story will become longer and longer. There are parts of the work that can be compressed and drawn with more perspectives, and the reason why I used a similar method when creating is the same. So what he's basically saying is the reason they decided to go with the 3 route thing for Trails Beyond the Horizon is because if it was only following Van's perspective, even if you had Reen and Kevin involved in the story, you would have still had to have had Van as the center point, meet up with these characters and experience those things as well. So by making them the, Reen, Van, and Kevin the central protagonists, you don't have to have Van in every place all at once. Which I don't know if that was really for the best, because Um, I love Kaino Kiseki. It is still currently my favorite game in the series, but there is a lot of points where Van is just kind of like on the side while the plot is progressing with where Reen and Kevin are. I think the only part that really helps that is that, when they all meet up in the garden, they do exchange notes about things that they can. But I do think it would have been better if, similar to like a Cold Steel 4 situation, if, like how Estelle, Joshua, and Lloyd were involved in the story, but it wasn't their story. I think it might have been better if we did something like that. Like if they still wanted to do a route system, but maybe follow different characters, I don't know. Or just have, obviously small sections where you play as Reen and Kevin, but it still has them eventually meet up with Van's group and help out in some way. But kind of too late to worry about that. For example, if one main character goes to Crossbell and goes to the Empire and comes back again, just by connecting the multiple stories properly, the connection will swell and the volume become outrageous. So he's basically talking about the future if there is a situation like that, because after we're done with Calvard, I do think the final arc is going to have us jumping all over the country, including places we haven't been to before. So odds are, moving forward, I don't know if Kai 2 will have a multiple route system like this. We'll get into that later in this interview. But moving forward, I do think, we're probably going to have a similar system like this. It's like, oh, Reen is in the Free Cities in the game after Kai 2. Van is in Liberal for some reason. And you've got Kevin or Lloyd or Rufus or whoever we end up as main protagonists is in the Far East, seeing what's going on with the decaying of the land. We are going to probably have stuff like that all in a single game. Just because of how big these casts in this world has become. When I wanted to enter the trajectory of the world, obviously Kaino Kiseki, and show it through the movements of the entire Republic, I had people look at it not only on the spot, but from various perspectives. And all at once I realized that this is the kind of thing that is happening. I thought it would be better to do it in a way about Kai, and it took shape after producing it. Did you consciously place the main character and friends who would be the player's eyes in each route? It had been decided since the beginning of the Republic arc that Kevin would be released. So obviously Kevin showing up. So that means at the time of Daybreak 1 coming out, they already knew that they were going to involve Kevin at some point in this story. Which does make sense after everything we see. He retakes up the mantle of the Heretic Hunter because of everything we've learned about that Hamilton is basically doing. It had not been decided yet at the time of Daybreak 1 whether or not Kevin could be controlled in a semi-leading role. And it was decided to create Kaino Kiseki. When that happened, I started over again. Okay. So it wasn't decided that Kevin would lead his own route until they got to Kai. Before then, they were going to involve him, but it wasn't decided how they were going to involve him. Maybe he was just going to be a party member that joined some group at some point. And Reen was the last one to be decided. I was worried at the end of whether or not to add him. Of course, there's no doubt some people would be happy for him to reappear. But when they're basically talking about how popular Reen is, that he was going to be overshadowing Van, which I'm sure depending on who you ask who played the game, some might say he did, some might say he didn't. I personally don't say he did. I think Reen, serves his role perfectly in what he needs to do, and I think Van serves his role perfectly in what he's going to need to do. However, the fact that Reen was involved in the Republic was foreshadowed at the time of Trails into Reverie. So he was basically saying it was inevitable that Reen was going to come to the Republic at some point. The members of the association were not originally scheduled to appear in Kaino Kiseki. So this is very apparent. I mean, we don't even need to talk about this too much, but so this is just talking about the different battle system stuff. We're not really going to talk about that too much. That stuff doesn't really pertain too much into what I'm interested in. Like, obviously the battle system improving is great, but I'm more interested into the story stuff, so we'll just kind of glance over this. So just basically talking about how everything has evolved since. So yeah, we'll just, some nice screenshots, but we'll scroll past all about that. We could read this part. Tell us about the Black Garden Castle, the Grimgarten, which is a sub-element in the progress of the game. I had the impression you were quite involved in the main story. Please talk about that. Compared to the Trails into Reverie one, there's a strong push to do it. One of the reasons I prepared something like it was because I really wanted a place to train them. Also, since it's inevitably the climax, the number of characters increases, and the length of drawing each character becomes shorter depending on the increase. And I couldn't prepare a place in the main story to develop it sufficiently. So what they're basically saying is, there are a lot of characters that kind of fall behind whether they're in the party, when they're in the party, when they're not. So he wanted to, obviously, and I think every game moving forward should involve the Martian Garden at some point. It doesn't need to be related to the main story, but, having a place where people can just use the characters freely, I just think should be in every game moving forward. I doubt it's going to be in the Sky remakes. There's really not a reason for it to be, but I do think for the mainline games, every one moving forward, we should definitely have one. If you look at things from a bird's eye view, if you do everything in the main story, you will end up with an incredible amount of content, so you'll inevitably have to prepare it in some way as a side element. While the creators really wanted to do it, there was a struggle in the development that they were basically struggling whether they wanted to do it or not. After that, there's no interaction between this character and this character in the main story. If you go to Grimgarten, there will be a bit of NPC-like conversation. So yeah, just having more conversations with certain characters that don't normally get to talk. When I first saw the plot of Kaino Kiseki, it was the only time I failed. I was surprised that there wasn't too much of the association. So he made a comment about it, and it was pointed out. So he began to... Because you really don't... The extent of Ouroboros being involved in the main story itself is, so you've got part of Act 2 where Van and them face off against Campanella and Simeon, and then obviously the professor is completely involved in the Grimgarten stuff, and then you do have Harwood help you out a bit in Van's Act 3 as well when you're going into the past version of the building in Anchorville. So yeah, they really didn't play a huge role in the main story, which was obviously kind of weird. Oh, and obviously Walter is with Reen's group during their Act 3 stuff. And then Lucrezia, number 3, is with Kevin's group during their Act 3. I'm sure we'll have to roll up the series soon, so it's always been decided between the people who want to pack up tightly and people who want to move forward with the conversation. Okay. It seems like the amount of work required for 3 routes while thinking about such things is difficult. Actually, it would be better to summarize the association so it appears in the main story, but I didn't plan to include the members of the association in the first place, and I ended up incorporating them later. Yeah, so it's basically explaining why they're not in the main story. There's no end to it when you come up with a small mystery, but as your appearances increase, the amount of things you sprinkled with increases. What importance do you place on selection? We sometimes hear, basically talking about which characters to add. We sometimes hear from fans asking why we don't do the... So they're talking about the bonding events. Why they don't do the bonding events in the main story, even though the content is good, but there's not much room to include in the main story. If it were true, we'd be... Yeah, so they're basically saying that's why they kept the Connect events moving into Calvard to kind of do that. And I agree with some Connect events being side story, but there are sometimes, they're talking about right here, the Elaine and Van episode, especially the second one in Kaino Kiseki, 100% should have been main story, because it directly has to do with not only their relationship, but the reason Van was able to survive being in the cult. Like, there's a direct thing there that they kind of do a better job of this. I don't know if they talk about it later down here, but obviously in the Grimgarten, you can get these tokens or whatever they are to essentially watch any Bond event or Connect events that you missed while playing through the main story. Because obviously you don't get infinite Connect points for each thing. So you are able to watch them all, and it is recommended that you watch them all, but you aren't forced to. So it does kind of suck when stuff like that happens. So yeah, they says trial and error, so hopefully the next game will do a better job of it. What will be depicted in the next work? Okay, so now we're moving into what's going to happen in the sequel game for Kaino Kiseki. What will be depicted in the next work is the ending and a story linked to the treasure, obviously talking about the treasure in space. Regarding the story, in a previous interview, you won't hesitate to tell it. The foreshadowing placed up to Daybreak 2 when the mysteries of the content of Zemuria have come out, but do you feel like you're able to bring out what you expected? I think I was able to get it out. In Trails of Cold Steel 4, we made it clear that the world of Zemuria itself is not like the Earth we live on. I think things are going well because I finally made that clear. So yeah, we did get teases of that, that there was a beyond and stuff like that, and now we know, at least visually what it looks like beyond our space in Zemuria. I think the story around the treasure was tied to the mysteries of the world itself this time. Was there a whole idea around there? It was decided at a very early stage which treasures were found in which areas. Okay, so they knew that Lagran's chest was going to be in Calvert early on. The fact that the Republic has the treasure of time may date back to Trails in the Sky. Something had been decided back then. However, in reality, things often become more specific after the development and production stages. For example, Crossbell's treasure, Phantom treasure, you basically what was going on with Kia was not the real thing. That wasn't a real, treasure. Things like that are actually an afterthought. It was decided after the production of the Empire arc began that multiple treasures would be used to depict the Ereboni Empire in this way. Okay. So they're talking about Fire and Earth when that happened in Erebonia. The general outline said the beginning is often decided more specifically after production begins. Even if you decide before that, it just means you have decided for now. Yeah, so that's not a real decision. The same goes for the existence of Agnes. So yeah, so they probably didn't know. I mean, maybe they'll say here that maybe they didn't know if they were going to have Agnes be this super important being to, deal with Lagran's chest. I have a very vague feeling about how this time will end. Did you decide how it would end there? After I started working on Kaino Kiseki, I decided to end there. So he's talking about when the cliffhanger happens. After this, there will be some conflicts, and this will be a story that is related to the most valuable function. Therefore, what remains is not only the ending, but a story linked to the most treasured function. So he's basically saying, what we move on to next. Yeah, so here, in it, Van's problems and Agnes' fate will be depicted. I think it will end next time. So he's saying, it is going to conclude in the next game, everything relating to Van, Agnes, and the Solutions Office, as well as everything in Calvert. So all I have to do after is fold it up, but at the end, there are a few more mysteries. I think they'll become key after all. So there is going to be a lot that happens in this final Calvert game that will set up the finale of the series. They're talking about the masked people who haven't shown their faces yet, except for one person. Well, I'll have to exclude the fact that it's obvious. Well, we've seen the faces of 2 remnants so far. There are only 2 of them who we have fully seen their faces. Once again, spoilers if you somehow kept watching to this point. Obviously, one is Giacomo, our taco man from the beginning of Daybreak 1, and the second one is, I don't remember his name exactly off the top of my head, but he was the previous tycoon before Aaron, the one from, 40 years ago. And then we've seen half of one's face. We did knock off the mask, the bottom part of the female sniper's mask, which right now people are either guessing it's Aida or it's going to be like an adult fairy from like an alternate timeline or something. At least that's what I've seen. There may be more that I haven't seen people talk about. And then, of course, the obvious 3 at the end with Kevin's group are expected to be the revolutionaries. So Sheena Dirk and her other 2 compatriots. Obviously not Auguste because we already dealt with him. Rather than acting behind the scenes, become clearer through my involvement with the main characters. Basically, Van is the main character, but for example, Reen and then Kevin. With depicting the future content of Zemuria, the existence of the church cannot be overlooked. Kevin will be very involved in that through the church. I don't know if the mystery is deepened or solved, but the church is not a monolith, but is depicted as being divided. Yeah, so it's basically saying, you've got, the side with the Pope, with the ones who are working for Nina, for example, right here, she's right here. And then, of course, you've got everything with the Dominions and everything. They're obviously 2 separate sides of the church that don't always agree on everything that they're doing. There are a lot of other characters coming out. I don't think there are many people left, including the Uh, okay, whose faces are not visible yet. So talking about the masked people. For the time being, the people who come out this time will continue to play their roles as the story progresses the history of Republic itself. So I hope you think that will be a big keyword, I think. And then we got Nina here. We got Van talking to. Oh wait, no, I forgot. We've seen Melchior's face too. So this is obviously Remnant Melchior. And then obviously we've got our Grendel Shot-Eye over here. When the story becomes grand, it seems difficult to draw characters individually. Is there anything you still want to delve into in the individual characters? The main story definitely needs to move forward and be drawn in the main part. The members of the Solution Shop continue to be linked to the main story. Of course, Aaron and Judith are there. I think that area will continue to be clearly drawn. It's difficult in terms of balance, but we'll try to see what actually happens. So he's talking about, there's obviously a lot of characters who are going to be important. I really can't, besides, and I hate to say this, besides Burgard, I do think everyone else is going to have a major role. Burgard is kind of just like the parental figure for this arc. I do think there are some secrets related to Burgard, but I don't know if we'll get to that during this arc. That might be something that happens later, because we still don't have a clear-cut explanation as to how he lived. And, he has some shady conversations with, like, Campanella about how he survived, like, very vaguely, and there's just not a lot drawn about that, or hasn't been in this arc at all. But, obviously Ferry's arc has to deal with her finding out what being a warrior means to her. Aaron has to figure out what he wants to do with his life, and obviously both of them have their own remnant that they're going to have to deal with. The woman with the sniper will be Ferry's opponent. The old tycoon will be Aaron's opponent to deal with. We also don't know if there going to be a point where Aaron can control his tycoon power that's inside him, maybe confront it. Who knows? Judith and Quattro both have to deal with everything regarding Professor Hamilton and Judith's grandmother. And there's just a lot that needs to obviously be dealt with. Everyone has a very strong relationship, and Reset has a lot to do with what happens next. She is herself a big mystery, and that will be revealed next time. The next scenario has already been decided at this stage. So the complete story from start to finish for Kai 2 is done. So now they just have to make the game. Which I'm sure they've already been doing as they've been writing it, but the actual story itself is finished being written. So I know everyone wants, they say, put off Kai 2 until we can get a worldwide release. I don't think that's happening. I would love if they can somehow manage it, but I just don't see it happening. I think Kai 2, September 2026, it's being released. And I think this December, we're going to see our first looks at it. Obviously, there are still other things, what's going on with Tokyo Xanadu 2, but I don't think that's going to take priority over this, because Trails is Falcom's bread and butter. So I do think this is going to take priority. So yeah, next scenario has already been decided, and the structure of the story will be a little different from Trails Beyond the Horizon. The system will be really conscious of storytelling for the second half. So odds are, based on how they're wording this, it may not be a route system for the final Calvard game. It may just follow Van's point of view, and then have certain points of the game where we play as Reen and Kevin and whoever else decides to show up, and follow what's going on with them. So, if they want to do something where we get a true final rematch between Reen and Shizuna, Van shows up with Shizuna, and then they have that match, like, right in front of us. And then, obviously, everything dealing with the Black God, or the fight in space. Like, I assume Reen and the others are probably going to find a way to battle that, Ishmelga / Zoa Gilstein looking thing we saw take Amelia down at some point, but it's hard to say how it's really going to work out. Here's obviously the biggest spoiler of all. We got Goddess Agnes with the to be continued sign. I don't think there was any halation due to the system being packed in. Will the next work follow this trend? I don't think it will be completely different. There are still issues to be solved, and it feels strange that the system suddenly changes drastically in the final part. If I were to add it, I personally think it would be unstable because the player has too many options. In fact, that part has been reviewed in Trails of the Sky first. So what they're basically saying is, or what he's basically saying is, not too much is going to change. We're going to have our usual, we got the action combat and the normal turn-based combat. We got the awakenings. We got in Kai, Zoc, all that stuff. So there's probably not going to be too much that gets added. Some stuff is probably just going to be refined. Trails of Sky First is the opposite of Trails Beyond the Horizon, and the player's options are simple and elaborate on the enemy's AI. My pieces are simple, but I'm trying to create battles I can devise for various situations. After that, what will happen in the battle system of the final chapter of Kaino Kiseki, I'm sure there's no end to that. Trends will also change. The number of titles of the same type as command battles itself is increasing. The same goes for Atlas's Persona series and Gus Atelier series. I feel like everyone is worrying as we move forward, but we want to maintain our turn-based. So obviously they're talking about keeping turn-based, but with command battles, but they're also implementing the stuff for the action combat. Is there anything you can tell us now? If you look at the opening movie in the game, there is a cut where Rune is walking, and that shadow at the time is Grendel, in fact. It is in the opening movie that was released before its release. The shadow is not Grendel's. So he's basically saying this opening right here that's on YouTube does not have the shadow behind Rune. But if you look at it in game, you will see the shadow of the Grendel. That's why I didn't see anyone else catch this on release, and most people probably didn't because we all watched this opening a million times before the game actually came out. So we didn't really have a reason to pay super close attention to the game version of it. It is true that there are people who made great considerations and analyzed from videos. The staff who did that won't tell me. I listened to the story from development and replaced it only when it was released. Thank you for the valuable comment at the end. So that's pretty much everything. Obviously, a lot of good information, stuff to... I mean, obviously, nothing really direct about where the next game is going to start or anything like that. But it is very exciting to see where we are going to be going. And, obviously, to cap things off with Reset, we obviously know she is from a different Reset as well. And they just found her capsule and, put her in her machine body and all that stuff. So, I'm really excited. Assuming things stay like they usually are, end of December, here in about 4.5 months, we should get our first screenshots, or if they want to do what they did with Sky the First, maybe we just straight up get a trailer for Kaino Kiseki 2. Obviously, it'll be the perfect time because it'll be a couple months after Sky the First. Everyone's gotten to play it. Obviously, people are going to be wanting to see when Sky Second Chapter Remake comes out, but I feel like that's probably going to be the following year. After the Calvert arc is complete, I think they will take a good 2 or 3 years in between the Calvert arc and the final saga, where they're going to finish off the Sky remakes. I don't know if they're going to straight jump into Crossbell or maybe like East or something will get a remake next. But I do think Sky Second Chapter and Sky Third Chapter will definitely be done before we dive into the next arc. But that's pretty much it, guys. So let me know what you guys think about this interview down below. I'm very excited to see what Kondo and the Falcom team has for us with the finale of this arc. Obviously, Trails Beyond the Horizon comes out in English in about 5 months. So hopefully people who haven't played that will be excited for that as well. So that's going to be it, guys. Hope you all enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe more if you're new to the channel. I'll see you all next time. Have a wonderful day, everyone.